Welcome to the From Corner to Corner podcast. I'm Sean, one half of the most electrifying podcast team out there. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get started with tonight's episode, be sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe because it only helps out the channel. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's show, and here we go.
Yeah. Come on. Yeah. I've been more than ready, prepping heavy for this day to come. Bet that if you let me keep it steady, you gon' know who won. I don't take it easy, nothing easy, except for giving up. I don't do no way except these weights that I've been lifting up. Got no fear in my body, no, I don't need nobody. I know everything that got me, and so now nothing can stop me. I just grind and work. Yeah, you know the motto. You know we going hard, but we might never see tomorrow. I kept my eye on the face and got real from it. Real, mastered patience and free will from it. That's the real motivation. Some people kill for it.
Welcome back to the From Corner to Corner podcast. We are back on another YouTube edition, and this week we have legend wrestler Lodi with us. How you doing?
Hey, man, it's Lodi. I am doing great. Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. We appreciate you being with us this evening, and excited to talk to you.
Good deal.
So Lodi, I obviously know who you are. Why don't you tell our viewers who you are? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, man, where do we start? It's you ask about a wrestling career that started in 1995 and it's 2022. That's a long time and a lot of wear and tear on the body, but graduated from East Carolina University, got a degree in political science, opened a personal training gym, had it for a couple years, met a wrestler, decided to try some wrestling. C.W. Anderson was my first wrestling trainer, actually, from ECW.
Nice.
And obviously pre-ECW days for him. And we ended up having a match in about 2 months after I started training, which is ridiculously crazy. And 2 years to the time I took my first bump, I started at a pay-per-view for WCW at the Palace at Auburn Hills in Detroit. So fast track on a wrestling circuit for sure to make it on a TV that fast. And, it was with Raven's Flock, the thing with Lenny, and then left WCW when it went under and did some touring overseas with World Wrestling All-Stars. I ran Dusty Rhodes Wrestling Company. I ran Turnbuckle for him. Came to Charlotte, worked with John Boy and Billy and their wrestling company for a while until I had my second broken neck, and that was 2002. And I was out for about 18 months, came back and continued to do some indie stuff, had a couple of shots with WWE here and there, and have been doing independent shows ever since.
Nice. Now, when I first came to know you was part of Raven's Flock. I was a huge Raven fan back in the day, and
Right.
there seemed to be many of us around. I just enjoyed that whole gimmick. Was that a lot of fun?
It was. It was by far one of my favorite times in the wrestling business. And because I was so new, I learned so much in that time. And you probably, if you know anything about Raven, you've heard about how intelligent he is, how smart he is, how good he is with the business. And to ride with him and room with him and basically live with him, day after day after day, I can't help but have some of that knowledge rub off on me. And he taught me a whole lot and did more for me in this business behind the scenes than probably any other one individual. And so the characters you saw in Raven's Flock, he had come up with almost all of that stuff on his own. And if you go back and think about it, Kidman's character, got over. I think the Lodi character got over. Then you had kind of Riggs and Sick Boy and Reese and those guys who kind of became one and didn't really. Raven had very distinct characteristics and things he wanted all those guys to do. And some of them chose not to necessarily follow his instruction. And I think that was to their own downfall, because I think the Flock could have been even better if the guys would have bought into everything Raven was preaching.
Definitely. I think back to you carrying the signs and, Kidman with the eye patch. And, of course, we forget that Saturn was in. It was just the amount of talent that was in Raven's Flock, I think oftentimes get overlooked. It was a tremendous amount of talent.
It was. And, one thing that I point out to everybody, if they forget this, they go back and look, a lot of times come back to me and they're like, I didn't realize at the time, but now I get it. If there was a flock run in, there's 8, 9, 10 of us hitting the ring, but we all hit the ring one at a time or two at a time, and it was always choreographed to the point where it made sense. If you saw an NWO run in, it was 12 guys just going in the ring and
right.
and just stomping on somebody, and they had too many guys. And Raven was adamant about all of us. Everything we did to a degree was put in place to make it make sense. And we always joke because me, Kidman, and I were always the first two to hit the ring. We were what we called the cannon fodder. Whatever baby face we were attacking, we're going down first. And we did 2 different programs with Benoit. And after months of coming in first every night, and Benoit hitting me with something or a suplex, whatever he would do, he'd be like, Lodi, why don't you come in and duck something tonight and hit me for once? Because, I've been killing you every night. And, he was kind enough to give me some stuff like that. So, yeah, but if you go back and look at some of the run-ins and some of the things, they were just set up differently. And I think it made it more interesting and made more sense than coming in just and glomming on to what we did.
Awesome.
The cool part, so many great ideas throughout the history of wrestling has come from the brains of the wrestlers, right? It's not always the writers
right.
that are coming up with this stuff. And that a lot of times is the best stuff that you see. And the fact that Raven, not only had an idea of how he wanted each of the guys to be, but the characteristics of how to attack, when to attack and stuff, that's just genius. That's amazing.
It was, and he laid all that stuff out. But again, in his mind, he sees wrestling like most adults see tic-tac-toe. It's just easy for him. And for him to rattle off characters and come up with ideas, he's just a great mind for that. And I'm glad to see him doing some work with NWA, actually. He and I we texted just a few minutes ago. So we still stay in touch, still see Sick Boy on occasion. He and I still work together a couple times a year. And so I see Reese every once in a while. So we stay in touch with some of the guys.
Now, you talked about graduating from East Carolina. Now,
Yep.
Were you and then you opened your gym, were you a wrestling fan prior to that, or was wrestling relatively new to you?
I was. So check this out. When I talk to people, when I first meet them, I tell them I'm one of the most blessed individuals you'll ever meet. And you hear that a lot, and people kind of roll their eyes like, yeah, sure, whatever. But for me, the more you learn about my past and what I was able to go through and live through and see, if you're a wrestling fan, I grew up in North Carolina in the 80s. So I got to see Jim Crockett. I got to see the Four Horsemen. I got to see Nikita Koloff. I got to see Dusty Rhodes. I got to see Magnum TA. Once a month in the Greensboro Coliseum. Occasionally we'd drive to Charlotte because I grew up in Asheboro, kind of in the center of the state. So we'd go, I saw him in Raleigh. And the Crockett stuff to me was what I grew up on. And it's still some of my favorite time in wrestling to watch even to this day. And from, I graduated high school in '88. And, you doing the Four Horsemen thing there. We'll fast forward something pretty cool. Ric Flair had a daughter named Ashley who wanted to get into wrestling.
Yeah, I don't ever know what happened to her.
Yeah, well, her first trainer is talking to you. So she started with me here in Charlotte before that girl named Ashley went down to Florida and signed on with some company. But she was great when she left here. I had her for about 3 months.
Right.
So, and super athletic. So
She's only going to go down as the greatest female wrestler of all time.
I tell people that all the time because I totally agree with you. So there's one of the Four Horsemen's kids. And then there was this other horseman. His name was Arn Anderson, I think.
Yeah.
And he had a son named Brock who signed on with AEW last February.
Yeah.
No, you're looking at his trainer.
And so I think that alone says a lot about you and your ring and your in-ring ability. That children from some of the best have this is where you need to go to start your training. You're going to get the good foundation.
And not only that, but the cool part about it is you're training the children of your childhood heroes. I don't know what cooler that could be. That is so awesome.
So go back to what I said earlier about being the most blessed person you've ever met. So these guys that I grew up watching, I've become not only co-workers with a lot of them at WCW, but I've wrestled a lot of them. And I'm so Nikita Koloff and I do a lot of ministry work together. Mm-hmm. Nikita and Magnum TA and I did a thing up in Kentucky last May. And I love Magnum to death. And everybody knows Magnum's story from the car wreck and whatever. But we were at a church up in Kentucky, and the three of us were on stage together. It was called Road Stories. And the three of us kind of give our background and history and talk about wrestling some and our love for Jesus. But to sit on stage in church beside Magnum and actually hear the story out of his mouth of exactly what happened that night was heartbreaking, and just it was tough because I'd read about it. I mean, I remember when it happened. I was in high school, and so it was a big thing in the Carolinas when Magnum got hurt. But to hear him tell that story and sit on stage beside of him was pretty cool.
Right. And, the awful tragedy that happened to Magnum actually changed the trajectory of Nikita's career, because he went from being a heel to being the sympathetic face and started teaming with Dusty. So
Right.
it's funny how those stories all kind of intertwine.
Right. And how they ended up where they are. Absolutely.
Right. I remember listening to Nikita talk one day, and it was on a radio show, so I couldn't see him. And I'm hearing this guy talk, and I'm like, who the heck is this guy? And because he's supposed to be Russian. Well, he's not Russian. He's from Minnesota. And
He's
so
from Minnesota.
He would jokingly say that he was from Moscow, Minnesota.
Yeah, he still does that to this day, because when he and I are together, people walk up and they're like, "What happened to your accent?" One funny thing about Nikita and I, because we were obviously different generational wrestlers. He had retired by the time I started, but he and I were sitting in Raleigh, North Carolina, at a hotel one night having a long discussion. And it's back in 2001. It was one of the first nights we spent some time together. And he told me the story of his first wrestling opponent in wrestling, when he came in for Crockett. And he had never been in a ring, zero wrestling training. And Crockett sent him to Raleigh with Ivan to go work TV the next night after he met him, and told Ivan to get him there early so he could at least get in the ring and learn a little stuff. They stopped to eat. They ran late. They got there. There were already fans in the building. Long story short, if you don't know Nikita's first match, they taught him how to do a clothesline in the back, and told the referee, to tell his opponent, "You're taking a bump on the clothesline. That's it." And so that was the birth of the Russian Sick on 11 seconds. So the funny thing about that, his first opponent for Crockett was Barry Horowitz.
Okay.
Everybody knows Barry, right? So when I was at the power plant in Atlanta training, after I'd done Indies for about a year and a half, when you started getting a little better at the power plant, they would send you down to Florida once every 3 months for our WCW Pro show, where I had the rotating ring that was filmed over there at Universal Studios. So basically, we went down as enhancement talent. We were there for 2 weeks. You worked 4 times. My first wrestling opponent at WCW,
Mr. Barry Horowitz.
Barry Horowitz. Nikita and I wrestled the same guy for our first match for Crockett and WCW. So
that's awesome. That is really cool. So you told us that you're still wrestling. Where are some places that we might be able to see Lodi wrestle?
So anybody wants to find out where I am, I've got my social media. It's on Twitter. It's on Instagram and Facebook under Brad Lodi Kane. Lodi1 Brad is my Twitter and my Instagram. I keep my schedule up there, and I work anywhere from 4 to 6 times a month, sometimes a little more. Almost every weekend. I had 3 matches this weekend. I've got one actually Sunday afternoon that's a taping for a UK show. I will be in Greenwood, South Carolina at the end of the month on the 26th, which is almost into Georgia going down 85. And then the next night I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, down on the coast. And I wrestle everywhere from there to Charleston, West Virginia to Pittsburgh. I'm in Dallas in April and in May for the Christian Wrestling Federation. So my schedule is typically somewhere every weekend. And guys are like, so where do you go? It's almost always somewhere different. There are certain groups that bring me back in every couple of months. But most of my stuff's in the South. I would rather drive now than fly, because flying is such a hassle. So if it's 8 and 10 hours, that's a drive for me. But if it's a little longer than that, I'll take a flight.
Absolutely.
That's the second time in 3 weeks we've heard Christian Wrestling Association.
Right.
We interviewed Danny Saint a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
And he wrestles with them a lot.
Down in Texas.
We're both Christians. We're both, Jesus guys. We're recording in the back room of a church.
Did you get to read my shirt?
I did see that. I did see that. I love it.
anytime, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. I would have been gone a long time ago, and he saved me over and over. And so that's the other thing Nikita and I think we have in common. I spoke a lot of wrestling companies allow me to speak either at intermission or after the main event at the end of the night, and they'll give me 8 to 10 minutes, even on a secular show, to basically talk about my love for Jesus. And my last tag team partner that I worked on the Indies with since about 2011 was a guy I broke in the business back in 2001. His name is Scotty Matthews, and our tag team name was Team Fearless. And the whole tagline was, we're fearless to stay on any street corner, any wrestling locker room or venue, and talk about our love for Jesus.
Nice.
So,
That's
yeah.
big props, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, I love and they're, I mean, you're what, the fifth or sixth that we've done, and I mean, I think we've talked about Jesus at least 3 times. So, I mean, my mindset, I've been an in-home salesman for the last 11, 12 years. I can't tell you how many times that Jesus has come up because they'll see my cross and the first, oh, I love your cross. And the minute they say, I love your cross, the door is open, right?
There it is, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
I've been in people's houses for 3 hours talking about Jesus, and I'll be like, so do we want to talk about windows now, or do we want to keep? So you just, when you're in the South, of course, we live in central Kentucky. We're in Mount Sterling, Kentucky, a little town outside of Lexington.
Okay.
If you're in the South, you're probably going to find many occasions to be able to talk about Jesus. That is for sure. So I love it.
Saturday night, it was really good. We had a show Saturday night, and they let me come out right before a mission and talk. And so it's always well received, and I appreciate that. And so it's one of those things where Nikita and I have decided, while early in my career, I felt like I was becoming a wrestler, and I was going to all these different towns. And back in the late 90s, wrestling was hot. We were selling out every arena we did.
Mm-hmm.
We had 46,000 people in the Georgia Dome. We were packing the Alamo Dome, all the big, arenas we went to. We were packing some people in there, and Nikita kind of came up with this and smartened me up to it. He said, while we thought we were, honing our craft, becoming better wrestlers, he said with his fast entry into wrestling and mine as well, he said, I think God used our traveling and our getting up in front of people every single night and talking to people we don't know, basically get us ready for our ministry work now. Well, we thought we were going to becoming wrestlers, but now I stand up in front of people every weekend and talk about it. And there is no fear and there is no shame. I have no problem talking about it in front of anybody. And so, but I do think some of that came from when you can go out and wrestle in front of, 40,000 people in some wrestling trunks, you have to be pretty comfortable with yourself.
Right.
So, Nikita laughs. He's like, it's so much the same thing. What do? We used to get in the car, fly somewhere, get a rental car, go perform, hotel, next place. Same thing now, but our performance is just talking about Jesus.
That's awesome.
Fantastic. I mean, that's awesome. I wish we would have known you guys were going to be in Kentucky at that church. We would have definitely been there.
I've got to remember, we were in Southern Kentucky, and the name escapes me now. It was a really small place, but we had probably 180, 200 people there on a Saturday night. And it was last May, kind of coming out of COVID, because I had a crazy, so I told you guys earlier, I wrestle every weekend, but from March of 2020 until December, I did 4 shows the entire 9 months, and so that is, that wrestling is still a good source of income for me as well. But once we started back in 2021, I had 10 shows in April and 10 shows and appearances in May back to back. So I did 20 shows in 2 months, and that's a lot for this old body. Let me tell you, that's not something I want to do on a constant basis.
Right.
It was nice for the Lord to bless me, get me back to work like that. But I'm like, all right, we got to slow down a little bit. The
recovery time a little longer now, right?
Yeah. It's funny because, again, I talked about having a wrestling school, and so I've been blessed with that for the last 4 years. I've had a lot of guys come through. I had a kid this past weekend actually had his first match ever, so he's trained for about a year, had his first match. That's always a cool thing to have your first match and get that out of the way. But some of the kids, when they go to shows with me, they're like, Lodi, first or second matches in the ring, and they see me stretching out and getting dressed, and they're like, you're not on to the main event. Why are you stretching now? I'm like, if I don't start now, I'll break something 2 hours. So it takes a little longer to get ready, so.
That's funny.
So we have also fell in love with Carolina wrestling by going to WrestleCade. We are big AML fans. Do you ever get to work with AML?
I did. I've worked for them several times. I love Tracy. I've known him since before he got into the business, actually. Tracy Myers is phenomenal. And he brought Lenny and I in to WrestleCade in 2019.
I thought I remember you guys being there in 2019.
Yes, we remember. So they brought us in to do an appearance and a signing. And they asked us, they're like, hey, we got a favor of you guys. Would you mind being the last guys in the Battle Royal? And he said, so they sent like 28 guys to the ring with just generic music, but they let Lenny and I do our whole entrance. It's Raining Men. And so that was really cool. And then on top of that, to make it even better, when you're old like me, you don't like taking a bump over the top rope. And so you're in a Battle Royal. It's kind of like, how am I getting out of here? So Brian Hawks comes over and he goes, hey, I got a favor to ask you guys. And you guys were asked for. I'm like, what's up? He goes, well, Scott Norton and Jeff Farmer are here at the NWO. And Norton's got to have a hip replacement. He can't get in the ring. Can they come down 5 minutes of the Battle Royal, pull you guys out and fight you to the back? I said, hold on a second. So not only are we coming out last and getting our full entrance, but I don't have to take a bump over the top and I get to fight to the back with Farmer and Scott Norton from the NWO. I said, of course. And I love both those guys. They're great. So, it was like, do I have to pay you for doing this? Because that's not like work. That's not like work.
That's awesome. So what are some of your most favorite memories in the business? What are some of the, when you think of your career, what are some of those memories that pop up first?
If we just talk wrestling and take all the relationships aside, and that's a whole nother thing, like you guys said earlier, and I do want to touch on this, but when you said the relationship, to grow up as a kid and love watching the Four Horsemen and Arn Anderson, to working with Arn at WCW, he was an agent while I was there as a wrestler, and to have him come to me and say, hey, I've got a favor, would you mind training my son? And then on top of that, so we had practice 3 days a week. Every time Brock came to practice, as long as he was in town, Arn was with him. So to have Arn come to my wrestling school and be in the background, and for my kids to see him there, and he Arn is such a humble guy. He pulled me to the side after the third or fourth practice, and he said, I got to tell you something. He said, you're better at this than I thought you were, because I didn't realize you could be that patient. He goes, I don't know if I could do that. He said, but quick question for you. If some of the guys have been here for a while, if they have a question or if I feel like I can help them a little bit, would you mind if I say anything to them? I'm like, let's see what you got, kid. So, but yeah, of course, I tell him every week, I'm like, I could never pay you for what you've brought to the school and how much you've helped the young guys here. So you talk about a relationship, right, to have that. But as far as memories in wrestling, again, getting to see the world was pretty cool. I got to travel on someone else's dime, but people are always asking, what's your favorite match? That's something that always comes up. And I think I surprise people until they go back and watch it. And I suggest this is one of my things my students all have to do. 1998 Fall Brawl for WCW was Raven versus Saturn. Mm-hmm. And if Raven wins, Saturn's got to stay in the flock forever. If Saturn wins, the flock gets disbanded. And that just happened to be in Winston-Salem. And so we talked to you guys about me being from North Carolina. My whole family was there, grandparents, that kind of thing. And so to have the flock in there that night, and I was at ringside for that match, but it was a great match. And if you go back and watch that, it's September of 98 again, Fall Brawl. The false finishes on that match, every single one of them, the fans come out of their seats. And you just don't see that much anymore. And so that's one thing for me when I talk to the kids about a pop and about getting them on a false finish. It's almost like the fans now have become like golf fans. They're kind of, mm-hmm. It's just different. But when the kids watch this stuff from 98, they're like, those people are going crazy. I'm like, right. Yeah, they really did. Right. And so that was a good match. And that's always a fun one. And again, my matches that I've had with some of my best friends, those are always the fun ones that I'll remember forever.
Now, you talk about Fall Brawl. If I remember correctly, you had beat Saturn before that, and he had to be your personal assistant, correct?
For 30 days, yes. And the Thunder leading into Fall Brawl, if you don't remember, one of the most asinine things I ever did on TV. Perry comes to I made Saturn carry the signs for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and whatever I told him to do, he had to let Canyon and those guys beat him up. And so he goes out because Canyon was in the ring. And Canyon's yelling at him about, and he's carrying my signs. He's about, oh, you can't touch me, because Lodi will get mad, And Saturn holds up a sign and says, Lodi's not here. And he gloms Canyon. And the whole deal was he threw me in a lake. And so halfway through the show, Bobby the Brain, Heenan, and Tony Schiavone are sitting there talking, and I come up and I'm soaking wet, right? I got my gear on, my black pants, got my t-shirt on, my hair soaking wet. I've got seaweed all over me. And I'm like, has anybody seen Saturn? He threw me in a lake. I'm like, look. And I had those black leather pants. I've even got a fish. I had a fish in my pants. we went and got from the grocery store, and I threw it down. They video, get the video camera on the fish. So, some of that stuff, that tongue-in-cheek, the humor we got to do with that was a lot of fun. And I enjoyed that angle. And that part of the angle was all Saturn's idea, because he was trying, the Lodi character was over. And what I mean by when we came out to the arena, a lot of times we came out during the show or at the very beginning of the show. But when all 8, 10, 12, how many of us there was at the time, came through the crowd, 99% of the time, that whole crowd chanted, not Raven sucks, not the flock sucks. They all zeroed in on me. Lodi sucks. Lodi sucks. And so, it was one of those things where the guys were a little jealous of how over the character had gotten for my limited amount of time in the business.
Right. That's awesome. And, you talked about it earlier. And people there's not reactions like that. Of course, in the late 90s, wrestling as a whole is white hot. And
right.
I don't know that it's ever been hotter. And the fact that you were able to get a character over, and a lot of that had to do with your signs and, you all jumping people. But the fact that you were able to get that over, I think says a lot about you, but also says a lot about how invested fans were at that point.
They were. And I think, again, I'm giving credit to God for giving me an innate natural charisma that I can't take credit for. I try to teach it to my kids, and it's not something you can teach. You can work on it and get better at it. But Raven taught me so many little things along the way, and Dream, Dusty Rhodes helped me with so much of that. And so, and even Road Dogg, when we traveled overseas, and some of those things, like those little nuances you can do to basically going all the way back to Pez Watley, who's also a trainer of mine at the power plant, but somebody I looked up to. And Pez says, when you learn this business and you learn how to make people stand up, you can make them sit down. It's like you're a conductor.
Yep.
And you can make them do what you want them to do just based on your actions if you learn your craft and you get good at it. And that was one thing that I managed to learn. And for whatever reason, I could pull off in a big arena.
Nice. Now, Sean is a huge TNA Impact fan. And
okay.
he's gone back. Big Jeff Jarrett mark.
Okay.
He asked me before we came on, he said, now Lodi, he was supposed to work the first TNA show.
I signed a contract with him for either 4 or 6 shows, but I told you guys, remember when I said I had just moved to Charlotte in 2002?
Mm-hmm.
I had just broken my neck.
Yeah.
That's why they called Funk and put Funk in my spot. And then I was out for 18 months.
Yeah.
And never got the opportunity to get there after that.
Well, Lenny was already gone by then, and I didn't really have a desire. I did not think that I would go back to, like I said, for 18 months. I didn't do anything. I really thought I was finished.
Yeah.
And so I also, just again, to feed into me talking about being blessed earlier. Right. So the next surgery I had was a discectomy and a fusion. I had one in 94. I had the one we're talking about now in 2002. I had my third one in 2017. And I was only out from this last one. My neurosurgeon, after the surgery, I went in to see him after my 1-week checkup. And I said, Doc, I know you don't want to talk about this right now, but you got to tell me, how long will it be before I can wrestle again? And he looked at me and he used some words I won't repeat because, again, that's not the kind of language I use anymore.
Right.
And I looked at him and I said, what are you talking about? And he said, how much do you know about the NFL? I said, well, I'm a fan. I mean, I watch football. He said, if you've had one ACDF like you've had, you can play football again. If you have two, he said, you can't even step on a field. You are done. He said, this is your third. He said, you're never going to wrestle again. And I said, I'm not trying to argue with you because you're way more intelligent than I am, but you don't know my healer.
Right.
And 9 months later, I wrestled again. And that was 2018. And it's 2022, and I'm still going.
Right. Well, and I mean, you're exactly right. That is 100%. It's a God thing. You hear these testimonies. Shawn Michaels' testimony. He got saved. He found the Lord, and he woke up pain free. And the doctor's like, "There's no explanation for it." And he's like, "Yes, there is. It's Jesus. That's the explanation."
There's the explanation.
Doctors don't want to hear that explanation.
If you don't know my healer, you don't know what he can do. But let me tell you, I've seen it over and over again. I was telling you about my partner, Scotty Matthews. He had a tragic accident one night leaving the gym. He's a personal trainer as well in Fayetteville. And he was on a bicycle and got T-boned by a car and had an open book fracture of the pelvis. And so he had to have surgery. His pelvis was not only open here, but it was lifted. They had to pull it down, put it back in place with 2 plates and 6 pins. And of course, his first question to the doctor, I was there for his surgery, and it was going to be, when can he wrestle again? And the doc's like, he's never going to wrestle again. He said, I've had, 18, 19-year-old rodeo guys go back to this after 2 or 3 years of rehab, but he's 44, 45 years old. He's done. And he came back in a year and continued to wrestle again.
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah, very blessed.
One of the reasons why we started to do these, we talked about it earlier, is like we got into WrestleCade and the independent wrestling, right?
Right.
You're probably like the most, well, I won't say probably, you are the most seasoned wrestler that we've talked to this point.
Okay.
And the only one that has not lived their whole life on the independent scene, so to speak. But one of the things that we notice when we're at WrestleCade is you do see more emotion from the fans on these independent scenes. Like we all know, WWE is a machine at this point. Everybody knows what the show's going to be. You're there to see the fan, the stars, the show, the highlights, and all that stuff. But as a wrestling fan, and we're both wrestling fans,
Yeah.
we love the independent part of it because it reminds us of when we were kids, when you would see grandma in the front row trying to hit the wrestlers with a chair and getting so emotionally tied. And when we down there at WrestleCade, I mean, there's a core group of AML fans.
Yes.
That know every one of those wrestlers. The wrestlers know who they are, and they are right up in their faces as those go on. So,
Yeah.
it's still there. It's just not something that you see every day. And I'm sure you see that as you're traveling through all these shows and stuff. You see the local fans that are used to seeing these promotions are just into it. And I just think that's so cool. And that's why we like doing the independent stuff. So,
one of my friends asked me recently, who just kind of started following my career, and asked me, she was a huge wrestling fan. She goes, how different is it for you to work in front of 150 people as opposed to 46,000 people? And I've been asked that question a lot. And while 46,000 people sounds like a lot in the arena, like I bring that up because that was what we did at the Georgia Dome the night Goldberg beat Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got 11 million people watching us at home.
Right.
The number in the arena means nothing. And I try to explain that to them. It's like, for a TV product, that's like, I'm Robin Hood and those were the trees.
Right.
They're just backdrop because I'm playing to that camera.
Right.
And a lot of people have a hard time with that. But when I'm performing, and this was one of the best times of my wrestling career, and when I left WCW and ended up going down to Atlanta and running Destiny Rhodes Wrestling Company in Marietta, Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling, I not only booked his shows, He hired me as his booker and also worked helping train the kids at the school down there. But his deal at the time, WCW was gone. He wanted to go into those small towns WWE was never going to go back to. Mm-hmm. He wanted to go to Rome, Georgia. He wanted to go to Decatur. Those small towns, the WWE, they're just not big enough to bring in the WWE machine. And that's what we did for about a year and a half while I was there before I left. And by allowing me to book some of the guys he had relationships with, it was myself, C.W. Anderson, Steve Carino, Tommy Dreamer, Scotty Riggs, Glacier, Reese, some of the guys from WCW that lived in the Atlanta area that Dream were close with. But he brought in these other guys with names, and then Dustin came off his contract. So Dustin and Dream wrestled with us. And CW and I talk about this all the time. We probably made the least amount of money in our career then after being on TV, not counting when we first started and got paid $10 if we were lucky. We probably made less money working for Dream than we did any other time, but it was the most fun wrestling in our whole career because we're in front of towns of 400, 500, 600, maybe 1,000 people, but we were going to Live Oak, Florida. We were going to Dothan, Alabama to the Farm Center, which I hear they're tearing down, which was a real big building for WCW, and then down in Alabama for those groups down there. Continental ran there a lot and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, those are the towns we did. And that was, and I try to explain to my kids now, if you've got 40, 400 or 40,000, they paid to see wrestling. You still got to entertain them. Right. That's your job. Now, I'm not saying you got to go jump off a 50-foot balcony and go through 4 flaming tables for 3 guys. But I mean, 3 fans and a dog, which I wrestled in front of once. Great story. Probably one you guys have never heard. And this is an Indy story before we made it to WCW. You guys have probably heard about all the guys that came out of Minnesota that were all friends. Nikita, Kurt Hennig, and Nord, and all those guys, the Road Warriors, all those guys, Rick Rude that came from that area. Well, out of North Carolina in the mid-'90s, there was a pretty cool group of about 12 or 13 of us that came out who also all made it to TV. And it was, like I said earlier, myself and C.W. Anderson and Steve Carino. And there was these 2 guys called the Hardy Boys. And there was Shane Helms, and there was Marty Garner, and there was Joey Abs, and there was, all those guys that came out. And so for us to work together in those small shows, we were in, it was either Freeze, Virginia, which is spelled fries, or just right across the North Carolina border. We got there to a rec center one day, and 4 o'clock comes, the ring's set up, and everybody's kind of milling around. No fans anywhere. And the show started at 6, and all of a sudden it's like 4:30, and there's nobody there. It's kind of weird. The boys are like, usually there's some fans around or whatever. One of the guys looked at the poster that was up in the rec center, and all the posters had the wrong date on them. So we go to the promoter. We're like, hey, Gary, this is for next week. The show's today. And he's like, oh, no. 3 kids and a dog came in to play basketball. We did a battle royal of guys, like the 12 guys I just named. We went back later and laughed about how many of these guys made it to TV, went out and did a battle royal for 3 guys and a dog. Smallest crowd I ever worked in front of.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
To touch on your story about working with Dream, I think that says a lot about you, not only as a performer, but as a man, that a legend, maybe one of the best minds in the business, right, thought so much of you to bring you on and give you the roles that he gave you. I mean, that's awesome in itself. So
Dream was at WCW when I was there. He was an agent behind the scenes, and I knew him through the Flock stuff because Raven and he were close, and we had talked and had conversations, but didn't really necessarily work a whole lot together. But Dream was very instrumental in almost every backstage segment Lenny and I ever did.
Yeah.
And he had some of the best stuff for us, the best lines. And so what had happened, we became closer then. He and I were on an indie show in North Carolina. It might have been Lenore one night. He looked at me and said, kid, what are you doing now? And I'm like, I'm just doing indies. I was in Cary, North Carolina at the time. He's like, man, I sure wish you were a lot closer to Atlanta. I could use you down at Turnbuckle anytime you want to come down. And I was talking to my ex-girlfriend at the time, and she and I both ended up moving to Atlanta. And I walked in one day, and I'm like, Dream, I'm here. And he's like, what? It was just one of those things. And we just picked up from there, and it was really cool. So that, to sit in Dream's office 3 or 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, and then be on the road with him over the weekend and stuff was just, again, we go back to me being blessed, but spending time with Raven, spending time with DDP, spending time with, Dream. Some of the guys that have been known for having the best minds in the business, for the knowledge they gave me, for me not to pass that on would just be awful.
Right.
For sure.
So.
Well, I know we're a little crunched for time here. I'm watching the clock there. I know you got another interview to do after this.
I appreciate you doing that.
One of the things that we do, I mean, this is one of our things that we do is the YouTube thing, but we started this as we do a weekly podcast. We drop a show on Wednesdays and we drop a show on Saturdays. Our Saturday shows, we do fantasy booking, right? Okay. So we go back in history at some of the greatest moments and we rewrite them if it would have been different. Like our very first show was, what if Hulk Hogan turned heel in the 92 Royal Rumble rather than waiting to go to WCW? That was our very first show that we've done. And we've done many different occasions. Now, our Wednesday show, we do the Mount Rushmore of
something.
And so we started out, we did several shows with wrestling topics. And then we did a top 50 and we did like a 10-week thing where we counted down 5 different wrestlers from 50 all the way down to 1 and ultimately ended with our Mount Rushmore of wrestling.
Right.
So one of the things that we like to do when we ask the guys like you that have been through the business, what would be your Mount Rushmore of wrestling? And this can be inspirational guys to you or like us who looked at it as the biggest guys in the business where the business doesn't exist without these 4 guys. Right. Whatever you want to do, but what would be your Mount Rushmore of wrestling?
You know what is so funny? I as soon as you said Mount Rushmore earlier, I just chuckled inside. This is, for whatever reason, become a very common topic with everyone.
Yes.
I've been asked this question in interviews probably more times in the last 2 weeks than I have the last 2 years.
Hilarious.
I don't know
They took our idea.
I don't know what got it started, but everybody's doing it now. Like in the last month, I'm telling you, it's just, I'm inundated with it. And I think for me, and this is just Lodi talking, if you're going with like the 4 wrestlers who made wrestling what it is and put us where we are now, I mean, because I just did this, how do you not go Flair, Hogan, Rock, and Austin? They're just the 4 biggest, most well-known names. It got nothing to do with talent or in-ring work or that kind of thing. But as far as the general population, I don't think you can beat those 4 for the top 4.
The only one that we had different is we had Cena instead of Rock. And it's just because of longevity. That was the reason that we did that. He's carried the WWE literally for 15 years. But The Rock is
The Rock took
it's unbelievable. He's a whole different thing.
He took it from wrestling to entertainment, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that was where we had the argument. I love all your thing about Cena is so true. And I'm a Cena fan. I think he has carried that company, for years on end. And I mean, his work has gotten better over the years. I've got no problem. The fans love him. They hate him. He gets a reaction. I've got no issue with him. Right. And I agree with that. It's just, but like you said, you almost have to take either Rock off and put him off on his own. I mean, what do you do? It's like, it's tough when you get there. And we were having one the other day and we're like, these were just wrestlers talking. And it may have been at wrestling practice sometimes, but what if you just said the best 4 technical wrestlers? Where do you go with that?
Right. Yeah.
Chris Benoit's got to be on there.
Would have to be. I mean, you would think
Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels,
Dean Malenko.
Yeah.
So there's 4 right there. You left Eddie Guerrero off.
And we didn't.
We love Eddie. We love Eddie.
It's so hard.
We did a show. We dedicated a whole show to Eddie.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. He was, again, we didn't get into this conversation, but by far to me, there's no one I ever got in the ring with, and I've been in there with almost everybody somebody could name, Benoit by far. And he was such a awesome guy to me. And I know with the way his life ended, it's obviously put a stain on everything he did. But that whole thing was so shocking to me, knowing him as a coworker and as a friend. It was as shocking if somebody would have called me, told me my own brother had done that day.
Yeah.
But
Well,
when
I'm sorry. Go on.
you go right ahead.
I said, I think unfairly his wrestling career has been judged because of that.
Right.
And I think, and I think people have taken away just what he has done in the ring.
Yeah. And he was so great. And Eddie, Dean, I mean, those guys, I was in the ring with all of them, and they're just amazing at, what we do. And one thing, we talked about him earlier, but I think the podcast has helped Arn Anderson move out of that horseman shadow of being behind Flair and Tully all those years, because so many young guys now, not just my kids because they know him, but when I'm at shows and stuff, guys are like, if you go back and watch Arn's promos and you go back and watch Arn's work, it stands up to this day.
Yeah.
And, just recently, probably in the last 6 months, I think you guys, I'm sure probably saw this, where somebody asked Taker who he thought the best was, and he said Arn Anderson.
Mhm.
You going to argue with Taker?
I'm not.
Oh yeah, and we didn't put him on our Mount Rushmore either. What do we do with Taker?
It's super hard to try to narrow it down to 4.
It's tough.
I think that's what's so appealing about the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
It is, you literally, it's such an argumentative thing. There's so many great guys over 50 years of wrestling that
Right.
it's that's one of the things that we try to do, is draw emotion out of our Rushmore shows.
Yeah.
We get way more feedback on our Rushmore shows than we do on our regular shows, because it is controversial. It generally is. Even when we do food, I mean, they're like, I can't believe you like that restaurant. I hate that restaurant,
Right.
So it's so funny. Well,
When you're doing fantasy booking, I thought you were like going back and changing finishes and changing matches.
No, it's just kind of what if scenarios. What if in '92 Flair doesn't go to WWF and he stays in WCW?
yeah.
What if there was a lid on the cage when Brody fought Lex?
Right.
Does Lex Luger make it out of Florida alive?
Probably not.
It is literally an endless supply of what ifs.
Yeah.
And nobody else does that. So that's why we're trying to grow this thing. And
I like that one. That's good. Like you said, the Rushmore thing is great, but I like that fantasy booking. Let the guys have some fun with that one.
yeah, for sure. Well, Lodi, we will have to get you back on the show at another time where we have
I
more
would love
time.
to come back on. If you guys would have me, I would love to come back. That would be great.
Anytime.
100%. Well, guys, it's been another great episode. We thank Lodi so much for being on with us tonight. This is the From Corner to Corner podcast. You can find us on TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. We're everywhere where you find us. Our shows drop on Saturdays, Wednesdays, and then our YouTube shows drop on Fridays. So we look forward to see you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you.